Emma Thompson stood in the bustling corridors of St. Jude's Hospital, her heart racing in rhythm with the beeping machines surrounding her. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting a harsh glow on the tired faces of the staff who, like her, were caught in the whirlwind of saving lives. Each day, she navigated through the challenges of her demanding job as a young surgeon, driven by an unwavering desire to make a difference. Yet, in the depths of her heart, she carried the weight of her mother's disapproval. Margaret Thompson, a woman of traditional values who could not fathom her daughter's ambition to work in such a high-stakes environment. "Emma, you're throwing your life away," Margaret would often admonish, her voice laced with concern. "Why can't you just settle down and find a nice man? You don't need to be in that hospital, risking everything." Emma would respond with a determined glint in her eyes. "Mom, I'm doing what I love. I want to help people. Can't you understand that?" Each encounter left her feeling more resolute, but also deeply frustrated. She admired her mother's intentions, but the generational divide was a chasm that seemed to widen with each passing day. One late evening, after an exhausting shift filled with surgeries and emergencies, Emma stepped outside to catch her breath. The world outside the hospital was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind. As she walked towards her car, she noticed a figure huddled against the wall of the hospital entrance. It was a man, disheveled and clearly in distress. The flickering streetlight illuminated his face, revealing deep lacerations on his forehead and bruises that marred his skin. "Hey, are you okay?" Emma asked, her instinct as a surgeon kicking in. She rushed over, kneeling beside the man. "You need help." The man looked up, his eyes filled with pain and confusion. I don't know," he croaked, his voice barely audible. "I just need to rest." "No, you need medical attention," Emma urged, already assessing the situation. She could hear the faint sirens in the distance, but the thought of leaving him to fend for himself was unbearable. "I'm a surgeon. I can help you, but we need to get you inside." With a deep breath, she made a decision that she knew could challenge the very foundation of her career. Emma helped the man, whose name she learned was John Mitchell, to his feet, wrapping an arm around his waist to support him as they made their way back into the hospital. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of taking action against the hospital's strict protocols. As they entered the emergency room, chaos still reigned. Nurses rushed past them, and the sounds of medical equipment filled the air. Emma quickly glanced around and whispered urgently to the closest nurse, "I need a stretcher over here. This man needs immediate attention." "Dr. Thompson, what are you doing?" "He's not a patient," the nurse protested, her eyes wide with disbelief. "He needs help." "I can't just leave him out there," Emma insisted, her voice unwavering. "Please, just trust me." Just as the nurse nodded reluctantly, Emma felt a presence behind her. It was Dr. Robert Edwards, her superior, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "Emma, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his tone icy. "You can't just bring in anyone off the street. This is a hospital, not a shelter." "Dr. Edwards, he's injured. He needs care, and it's our duty to help him," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. She felt the weight of his disapproval bearing down on her, but she refused to back down. "Your duty is to follow protocol," Dr. Edwards snapped. "This is unacceptable behavior. You're risking the hospital's reputation." He gestured toward John, who was now slumped against the wall, barely conscious. "Get him out of here before you jeopardize your career." Emma's heart sank at his words, but she stood her ground. "I won't abandon him. Not now. I'm going to help him, no matter what it costs me." "Emma, you're making a grave mistake," Dr. Edwards warned, his voice low and threatening. "You could lose your position for this." "I'm willing to take that risk," Emma declared, her resolve hardening. She turned back to John, who was now resting on the stretcher. "We're going to take care of you, I promise." The tension in the air was palpable as Emma worked swiftly to assess John's injuries, calling for the necessary supplies and relaying information to the nurses. Each moment felt like an eternity, and she could sense Dr. Edwards watching her every move, his disapproval a weight upon her shoulders. In that chaotic environment, the world around her faded, and all that mattered was the life of the man before her. As she worked, a thought flickered through her mind. This was what she had trained for, what she had always dreamed of, saving lives, regardless of the circumstances. Hours later, after what felt like an endless series of procedures and treatments, Emma finally stepped back, exhaustion washing over her. John was stable, and for the first time since she had found him, he looked at her with gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse but sincere. "You saved my life." Emma smiled, a rush of warmth flooding her heart. "You're going to be okay now. Just take it one step at a time." But the relief was short-lived. The next day, as Emma walked into the hospital, she was summoned to Dr. Edwards' office. The atmosphere was heavy, and she could feel the tension in the air. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for the confrontation that was inevitable. "Emma," Dr. Edwards began, his tone reproachful, "I cannot overlook what you did. You not only broke protocol, but you also put the hospital at risk. I have no choice but to terminate your position here." Her heart dropped at his words, and she struggled to find her voice. "But I saved him, Dr. Edwards. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" "Not at the cost of our integrity," he replied coldly. "You need to understand that this is a professional environment, not a charity. You've made your choice, and now you'll have to face the consequences." Emma stared at him in disbelief, tears pricking at her eyes. "I can't believe this. I did what any doctor would do." "Perhaps, but you're still unqualified to make decisions that could jeopardize your career and the hospital's reputation." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. As she left his office, the weight of despair settled heavily on her chest. Emma thought of her mother and the words she had spoken over the years about her choices. Could she have been right all along? Had she sacrificed too much for a fleeting moment of compassion? But deep down, Emma knew she had acted with integrity, and she wouldn't let anyone take that from her. Emma Thompson was a young surgeon whose life revolved around one singular dream: to save lives. Every heartbeat she observed in the operating room fueled her passion, and every life she saved became a testament to her unwavering resolve. Yet, this fervor was often met with skepticism, particularly from her mother, Margaret. Margaret was a woman of traditional values, whose vision for her daughter did not extend into the high-pressure world of medicine. "Emma, you need to think about your future," Margaret would say, her voice laced with concern as they sat at the dining table, the remnants of a hastily prepared dinner before them. "Being a surgeon is dangerous, and not just physically. The stress, the nights away from home. It's not a life for someone who wants stability. But Mom, it's what I love. I can't imagine doing anything else," Emma would respond, her determination shining through. "I want to make a difference. I want to be there for people when they need help the most." Margaret would shake her head, her brow furrowed. "You'll see. One day, you might regret not following a safer path." This conflict loomed over Emma like a cloud, but whenever she stepped into the hospital, it dissipated. The sterile smell of antiseptic, the hum of medical equipment, and the urgency of her colleagues invigorated her spirit. Every day was a new challenge, offering her the opportunity to make an impact on lives that hung in the balance. One fateful night, after a grueling 12-hour shift, Emma found herself walking towards the hospital's entrance, her feet heavy with fatigue. The bustling city outside was alive with the sounds of late-night revelers and the occasional siren, but her mind was clouded with thoughts of the patients she had seen that day. Suddenly, she stumbled upon a figure huddled against the wall. A man, disheveled and bleeding, with a look of pain etched across his face. "Please, help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Emma's heart raced. It was John Mitchell, a homeless man she had seen around the hospital before, but this time he was gravely injured, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle, and his clothes stained with blood. She knelt beside him, her instincts kicking in. "John, what happened?" "I fell into a broken glass," he murmured, grimacing as he tried to shift away from the pain. Emma's mind raced. She knew she had to act quickly, but hospital protocols flashed through her head like warning lights. Treating a patient outside of the hospital could mean serious repercussions, especially if she was caught. Yet, in that moment, her compassion overruled her fear. Stay here. I'll get you help, she said, determination filling her voice. As she carefully assessed his injuries, she could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. I'm going to bring you inside. Just hold on, she reassured him, her eyes locking onto his, willing him to trust her. With the urgency of a seasoned surgeon, Emma helped John to his feet, supporting him as they made their way through the hospital entrance. The bustling night staff barely noticed as she led him to an empty examination room. She quickly gathered supplies, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Emma, what are you doing? A voice interrupted her frantic preparations. It was Dr. Robert Edwards, her supervisor, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. You can't bring him in here. He's a liability. Dr. Edwards, he needs help. I can fix his arm and stop the bleeding, Emma replied, her voice firm but trembling slightly. He's a human being, and he deserves care. This is a hospital, not a charity, Edwards barked, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. You know the rules. Get him out of here before you jeopardize your career. Emma stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. I'm not going to leave him out there to suffer, sir. I won't do it. The tension in the room thickened as they stared each other down, the weight of their opposing beliefs hanging heavily in the air. Finally, in a moment of clarity, Emma realized that this was more than just a confrontation about a single patient. It was a test of her commitment to her calling as a surgeon. Emma, you're making a grave mistake, Edwards warned, his voice low and threatening. If you proceed with this, there will be consequences. I understand the risks, she replied, her voice unwavering, but I also understand that I took an oath to save lives. I can't just stand by and do nothing. You're out of line, he snapped, stepping closer, his face just inches from hers. You have no idea what you're throwing away. But Emma knew exactly what she was risking. She was risking her career, her reputation, everything she had worked tirelessly for. And yet, looking at John's pain-filled eyes, she knew she couldn't walk away. Then you'll have to fire me, she said, her voice steady, but her heart racing, because I won't let him die on the street while I stand idly by. Edward's expression hardened, and for a moment, the room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Finally, he turned away, his frustration evident. Very well, he muttered, his back to her. You're making a huge mistake. Hours later, after Emma had stabilized John and sewn up his wounds, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the heavy realization of what she had done. She sat in the break room, her hands trembling as she cradled a cup of lukewarm coffee, the events of the night replaying in her mind. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Dr. Edwards stepped in, his face grim. Emma, he said, his tone clipped, you're suspended. Effective immediately. She felt the air leave her lungs. What? You can't be serious. I am. You've violated protocol, and I can't overlook this, he said, crossing his arms. This isn't just a warning, it's a demotion. But I saved his life. Emma protested, her voice rising. You can't punish me for doing the right thing. There are rules for a reason, Emma. You'll have to face the consequences of your actions, he replied coldly, before turning to leave. As she sat there, the weight of despair crashed over her. Emma had always known that her career would come with challenges, but she never imagined that her compassion would cost her so dearly. In that moment, she felt lost, questioning her choices and the true cost of her dream. Emma Thompson had always been driven by a singular purpose: to save lives. As a young surgeon, she had dedicated herself to the rigors of medical training, pouring her heart and soul into every procedure and every patient. Her passion, however, came with a heavy price. Her mother, Margaret, could not understand her daughter's commitment to a profession that seemed, at times, more perilous than noble. The tension between them simmered, a constant reminder of the sacrifices Emma made in pursuit of her dream. One particularly exhausting night, after a grueling 12-hour shift in the operating room, Emma found herself wandering through the dimly lit corridors of the hospital. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She could feel the weight of fatigue pressing down on her, but her heart remained resolute. As she passed through the entrance, something caught her eye. A figure huddled against the wall, partially obscured by the night, drew her closer. It was a man, disheveled and covered in grime. But what alarmed her most was the deep gash on his forehead, blood seeping through his tangled hair. "Hey, are you okay?" Emma knelt beside him, her instincts kicking in as she assessed the situation. The man looked up at her, confusion mingling with pain in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a faint groan escaped his lips. I need help," he managed to say, his voice a raspy whisper that tugged at Emma's heartstrings. Without a second thought, Emma knew she couldn't abandon him. The hospital protocols flashed through her mind. Rules about treating patients outside of the emergency room, the paperwork, the liability. But as she looked into the man's eyes, she felt an overwhelming sense of compassion. "You're going to be all right," she promised, her voice firm and soothing. "Let's get you inside." With great effort, Emma helped him to his feet, supporting him as they made their way toward the emergency room. The halls were eerily quiet, and she felt a sense of urgency building within her. Once inside the ER, she quickly assessed the situation. She had to act fast. She called for a nurse, her voice steady. "I need help over here. We have a trauma case." As the nurse rushed to her side, Emma turned her attention back to the man. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to establish a connection. John Mitchell," he replied, wincing as he leaned against the wall. "I didn't think anyone would help me." "You were right to believe someone would," Emma said, her determination unwavering. "Let's get you cleaned up." As Emma worked diligently to treat John's injuries, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a line. Every stitch she placed seemed to echo the unspoken rules of the hospital, rules she had chosen to defy for the sake of a life hanging in the balance. She knew that if her superiors found out, she would face serious repercussions. But the thought of leaving John to fend for himself was unbearable. After what felt like hours, she finally stabilized him. "You're going to be okay, John," she said, relief washing over her as she finished the last stitch. "Now, we just need to get you checked in properly." Just then, Dr. Robert Edwards, Emma's superior, entered the room. His presence was commanding, and Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. He scanned the scene, his eyes narrowing as he took note of the situation. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice laced with authority. Emma straightened her back, ready to defend her actions. "Dr. Edwards, this man was injured outside. I couldn't just leave him there. He needed immediate care." "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he snapped back, his face reddening with anger. "You've violated hospital protocol. You could jeopardize your entire career for this. I couldn't stand by and do nothing." Emma shot back, her heart racing. He was bleeding, and if I hadn't acted, he could have died. Dr. Edwards stepped closer, his voice lowering to a menacing tone. "Your compassion does not excuse your insubordination, Emma. You are not above the rules." Emma's heart sank as she realized the gravity of her situation. "I was trying to save a life," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Isn't that what we're here for?" His response was cold and unyielding. "You're here to follow orders. I won't tolerate this behavior." Feeling cornered, Emma stood her ground. "I refuse to apologize for saving someone's life. If that's what you want, then I don't belong here." The confrontation escalated, and Emma could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Dr. Edwards' expression hardened, and she knew the outcome before he even spoke the words. "Consider yourself suspended. You'll be receiving your termination notice shortly." Emma felt a mix of disbelief and anger surge within her. "You can't be serious. I did what I had to do." "Your actions have consequences, Emma," he shot back, turning on his heel and striding out of the room, leaving her in stunned silence. The reality of her situation hit her like a ton of bricks. She had risked everything for a man she barely knew, and now her career hung in the balance. As she sat down heavily on a nearby stool, the adrenaline faded, leaving behind a profound sense of loss. Hours later, while she sat in the break room nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, filled with disapproval. You need to think about your future, Emma. This isn't a game. Just then, the door swung open and Michael Anderson, an inspector from the Ministry of Health, entered. He looked troubled and was scanning the room as if searching for someone. When his eyes fell upon Emma, he approached her with urgency. "Emma, I need to talk to you," he said, his expression serious. "What's wrong?" she asked, her heart racing. "It's about John Mitchell," he said, taking a seat across from her. He's my father." Emma's eyes widened in shock. "What? I had no idea. Is he okay?" "He's in the hospital, but he's stable now. I came to find out what happened. I heard you treated him." "I couldn't leave him outside," Emma replied, the weight of her actions once again flooding her thoughts. "But I'm afraid I might have jeopardized my career for it." Michael's gaze softened. "You did the right thing, Emma. He needed help, and you were there for him. Not many would have done that." "I just hope it was worth it," she murmured, staring into her coffee cup. "I'm suspended, possibly fired. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to practice again." "You deserve recognition for your courage," Michael said, leaning forward. "If you hadn't intervened, who knows what would have happened to him?" Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. "Thank you for saying that. I just wish it didn't come at such a high cost." As they spoke, a bond began to form between them, one rooted in shared hardships and compassion. Emma felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest, the possibility of justice and redemption, not just for John, but for herself as well. In that moment, amid the uncertainty, she realized that her passion for saving lives was worth fighting for, even if it meant standing alone against the odds. Emma Thompson had always been a force of nature, her ambition and dedication to the medical field bordering on relentless. With each surgical procedure she attended to, she could feel the pulse of life beneath her hands, and it exhilarated her. Yet, despite her passion, a shadow loomed over her aspirations. Her mother, Margaret. Margaret had envisioned a different life for her daughter, one that didn't involve the long hours and high-stress environment of a hospital. Conversations between them often spiraled into heated debates, creating a chasm that Emma found increasingly difficult to bridge. One particular evening, after a grueling 10-hour shift, Emma emerged from the sterile confines of the operating room, her scrubs stained and her eyes heavy with exhaustion. The hospital hummed quietly around her, the usual bustle of nurses and interns winding down for the night. As she walked towards the exit, her thoughts drifted to her mother's disapproving voice echoing in her mind. "You're going to burn out, Emma. You need to think of your future." But Emma's heart was set. Her future was here, among the patients she fought to save. As she impaneled her mind to focus on the path home, something caught her eye just outside the hospital doors. A figure lay slumped against the wall, illuminated by the flickering streetlight. Curiosity mingled with concern as she approached. It was a man, disheveled and filthy, with a severe laceration across his brow. His clothes were torn, and he shivered involuntarily, as if the cold was a physical entity attacking him. "Hey, can you hear me?" Emma knelt beside him, her instincts kicking in. She could see he needed help, immediate help. The man's eyes flickered open, revealing a depth of pain and despair. Who are you?" he croaked, struggling to focus on her. "I'm Emma, a doctor," she replied, her voice steady. "You're hurt. I need to get you inside. You need medical attention." No, don't take me in there. They won't help me," he muttered, trying to push himself away from her. But Emma gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Please," she urged, "I can help you. It's what I do." Despite knowing the rules that bound her to the hospital's protocol, her empathy overruled any hesitation. She reached for her phone, prepared to make the call that would bring help, but then quickly reconsidered. Instead, she hoisted him up, supporting his weight against her. "Let's get you in. I'll take care of you. Trust me," she said, her resolve strengthening with each word. As they made their way back into the hospital, her heart raced, both from the fear of being caught and the urgency of the situation. Emma led him through the back entrance, where the usual hustle was replaced by the eerie quiet of the night shift. She guided him to an empty examination room, her mind racing with thoughts of what could happen if she was caught. Once inside, She began to assess his injuries. "What happened to you?" she asked, her hands deftly examining the wound. I fell. Got jumped in the alley," he stammered, his voice laced with shame. "John, is it?" she asked, trying to connect with him. "Yeah. How'd you know?" he replied, surprise evident in his voice. "I heard you mumble your name earlier." As she worked, Emma felt a surge of determination. She was breaking the rules, but her heart told her that saving this man's life was worth any consequence. Suddenly, the doors swung open, and Dr. Robert Edwards, the chief surgeon, stepped in. His expression morphed from casual curiosity to shock as he took in the scene before him. "What is going on here, Dr. Thompson?" he barked, his voice low and disapproving. Emma's heart sank. "Dr. Edwards, he needs help. I couldn't just leave him out there. He's a homeless man who doesn't belong in this hospital," he interrupted sharply. "You know the rules, Emma. You can't treat patients without proper admission. This is a violation of protocol." "I understand that, but he's hurt," she exclaimed, her voice rising in desperation. "He's a human being, and he needs help now, not paperwork." Dr. Edwards stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "And you need to understand that your actions have consequences. You're jeopardizing not only your career but the hospital's reputation." Emma felt the weight of his words, but her resolve hardened. "I won't stand by while someone suffers. If we can save one life, isn't it worth it?" "Enough," he snapped. "You're suspended effective immediately. I will not tolerate this kind of insubordination." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had fought so hard to get where she was, and now it all felt like it was slipping through her fingers. "Please, don't do this. I can fix this. I just need a little more time," she pleaded, her voice trembling. But Dr. Edwards was unyielding. "You've made your choice, Emma. Now, you must face the consequences." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Emma in a whirlwind of emotions. As she stood there, the reality of her situation settled in. She had acted from a place of compassion, yet it had cost her everything. She glanced back at John, who was watching her with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Emma, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get you in trouble," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not your fault, John," she replied, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "I would do it again if it meant saving your life." "Why would you risk your job for someone like me?" he asked, bewildered. "Because everyone deserves a chance, John. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity," she said, her voice firm despite the turmoil within her. As she prepared to leave the hospital for what she feared might be the last time, Emma's thoughts were consumed by uncertainty. What would happen now? Would she find another job? Would her mother ever understand? But as she walked through the empty corridors, a flicker of determination sparked within her. She had fought for this dream, and she wouldn't let one man's cruelty extinguish her passion for healing. No matter the outcome, Emma knew she would continue to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Emma Thompson had always envisioned herself as a beacon of hope in the medical field, a young surgeon who could make a difference, one life at a time. Her passion for saving lives had been ignited in her childhood, sparked by the stories of heroism and compassion shared by her father, who had been a doctor. However, as she pursued her dream, she found herself facing the harsh reality of disapproval from her mother, Margaret. Margaret believed that a career in medicine was fraught with danger, stress, and endless hours that would take away from family life. This disapproval weighed heavily on Emma, leaving her to navigate the complexities of her aspirations against the backdrop of maternal expectations. One evening, after an exhausting shift at the hospital, Emma stepped into the cool night air, hoping to clear her mind. The hospital had been particularly chaotic that day, with an influx of patients and a shortage of staff. As she walked toward her car, she noticed a figure huddled against the wall of the hospital entrance. It was a man, disheveled and unkempt, with a deep gash on his forehead that was dripping blood. Emma's heart raced as she rushed over. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, kneeling beside him. His eyes flickered open, revealing a mixture of pain and confusion. I think I fell," he stammered, his voice weak. Emma quickly assessed the wound. "You need medical attention. Can you stand?" He shook his head, grimacing. "No, I can't. I don't want to go to the hospital. They don't want me there." "Listen to me," Emma said softly, calming him. "I'm a surgeon, and I can help you. But I need you to trust me." The man's gaze softened slightly as he took in her words. "You're not like the others, are you?" Emma felt a surge of determination. "No, I'm not. I believe everyone deserves care, no matter who they are. Let me help you." With great effort, she helped him to his feet and guided him into the hospital, her heart pounding not just from the exertion but from the weight of the decision she was making. She knew that treating a patient outside of the hospital's protocols could have severe consequences, but the thought of leaving him in such a state was unbearable. As they entered the emergency room, Emma felt the tension in the air. She quickly ushered the man to an empty exam room, shutting the door behind them. "I need to clean your wound," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Will they come for me if they find out?" he asked, fear creeping into his expression. "No one has to know," Emma assured him, her hands steady as she gathered supplies. "What's your name?" "John," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, John. I'm Emma. Let's take care of that wound, all right?" As she worked, she noticed the way John flinched at her touch, and she spoke soothingly. "You're going to be fine. Just breathe." Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Emma, her actions were being closely monitored by Dr. Robert Edwards, her boss. He had always been a stickler for rules and regulations, believing that protocol was paramount in the medical field. When he walked into the room, his expression darkened at the sight of Emma treating a patient who was not officially admitted to the hospital. "Emma, what in the world do you think you're doing?" he barked, crossing his arms and glaring at her. Startled, Emma turned to face him, her heart sinking. "Dr. Edwards, he needs help. I couldn't just leave him out there." "Do you have any idea what you're risking?" he snapped. "You're violating hospital policy. This is unacceptable." Emma stood her ground, her voice firm. "What's unacceptable is leaving someone to suffer because of their situation. He deserves care just as much as anyone else." Dr. Edwards' eyes narrowed. "You're not above the rules, Emma. I'll have to report this." "Report what? That I showed compassion?" Emma challenged, her frustration boiling over. "Compassion doesn't excuse recklessness," Dr. Edwards shot back, his tone icy. "You're jeopardizing your career for a transient. This is not the time for idealism." As the confrontation escalated, Emma felt her heart race with a mix of anger and fear. She had always respected her boss, but this moment exposed the chasm between their beliefs. "It's not just about the rules, Dr. Edwards. It's about human lives. If we can help, we must." Dr. Edwards' expression hardened further. "You're making a mistake, Emma. I won't tolerate insubordination. You're fired." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Emma's world seemed to shatter around her. "You can't be serious," she exclaimed, her voice breaking. "I am," he replied coldly, turning on his heel and leaving her in stunned silence. As she stood there, her heart heavy with the weight of her dismissal, Emma couldn't help but feel a surge of disbelief and despair. She had risked everything for a stranger, and now she was paying the price. The reality of her situation settled in as she glanced back at John, who was watching her with concern. "Emma, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not your fault, John," she reassured him, though her own voice was thick with emotion. "You deserve care, and I couldn't let you suffer alone." "I didn't mean to get you in trouble," he whispered, his eyes downcast. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "You didn't. This is my choice, and I stand by it. We'll get you the help you need, no matter what it takes." As the night wore on, Emma left the hospital, her heart heavy but resolute. Despite the challenges ahead, she knew she had made the right choice in helping John. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger than herself, and deep down, she hoped that her actions would spark a change within the very system she had dedicated her life to serving. Emma Thompson had always been passionate about saving lives, a calling that resonated deeply within her. As a young surgeon, she often found herself working long shifts at the bustling city hospital, where the scent of antiseptic mingled with the frantic energy of the medical staff. Yet, Despite her unwavering dedication, she faced relentless criticism from her mother, Margaret, who believed that a career in medicine was too perilous and demanding for a woman. Margaret's traditional views clashed fiercely with Emma's dreams, leading to countless heated arguments in their modest home. One particular night, after an exhausting day filled with back-to-back surgeries, Emma stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The cool breeze brushed against her skin, a brief respite from the chaos of the hospital. As she walked towards the parking lot, she noticed a figure huddled near the entrance, shivering and in obvious pain. It was John Mitchell, a homeless man she had seen around the area before. His condition was alarming. A deep gash ran across his forehead, blood soaking through the tattered fabric of his shirt. "Please," he gasped, his voice hoarse and weak. "I need help." Emma's heart raced as she knelt beside him. "John, what happened?" "You need medical attention," she urged, her instincts kicking in. She could see the fear in his eyes, the familiar look she had witnessed countless times in her patients. "I got jumped. They took everything," he stammered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Despite the late hour and the hospital's strict policies against treating patients outside the emergency department, Emma felt a surge of compassion. She knew that if she didn't act quickly, John might not survive the night. "Stay with me, John. I'm going to help you," she said, determination lacing her voice. Emma carefully helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they made their way back into the hospital. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating the stark white walls, which felt all the more oppressive in the silence of the late hour. As they entered the emergency room, Emma glanced around to ensure no one was watching before guiding John to an empty examination room. "Emma, what are you doing?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Dr. Robert Edwards, her superior, a man known for his unyielding adherence to hospital protocols. His brow furrowed in disapproval as he crossed his arms. "This isn't a charity. You can't just bring in patients like this." Emma straightened up, her heart pounding. "Dr. Edwards, he's in serious condition. He needs help now, and I can't just leave him outside to suffer." "You know the rules," he snapped, his voice cold and authoritative. "If you treat him without authorization, you risk your job. Is that what you want? Risk everything for a homeless man?" Emma's resolve wavered for a moment, but she quickly recalled the countless patients she had saved, the lives she had changed. "I can't turn my back on him. I won't," she declared firmly. With a sigh of frustration, Dr. Edwards stepped closer, his expression hardening. "You're putting your career on the line for this. If you proceed, I will have no choice but to report you." Emma felt a surge of defiance. Sometimes, doing what's right is more important than following rules that don't make sense. "If you want to fire me for trying to save a life, then so be it." Her voice trembled with emotion, but she stood her ground. Dr. Edwards narrowed his eyes, a mixture of anger and disbelief crossing his face. "You're making a grave mistake, Emma," he warned. Ignoring him, Emma turned her attention back to John, who was slumped against the wall, his eyes fluttering shut. "Stay awake, John. I need you to stay with me," she urged, her fingers deftly unbuttoning his shirt to assess the wound. As she worked quickly, stitching the gash on his forehead, she could feel the weight of Dr. Edwards' gaze piercing into her back. Her hands moved with precision, driven by her desire to help, but she was acutely aware that her actions could spell disaster for her career. Hours passed, and after what felt like an eternity, she finished bandaging John's wounds. He looked at her with gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You saved my life." Emma smiled softly, but her triumph was short-lived. Just as she stepped out of the examination room, she was met with the stern face of Dr. Edwards once again. "Emma," he said, his tone clipped, "you're fired. I cannot condone this kind of behavior in my hospital. You've jeopardized not only your position but the integrity of this institution." The words struck her like a physical blow. "You can't be serious," she stammered, feeling the tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I was trying to help someone who needed it. Help is one thing. Breaking the rules is another," he retorted coldly. "You've made your choice. Now live with the consequences." Emma's heart sank as she realized the enormity of what had just happened. She had followed her instincts, her compassion, and yet it had cost her everything she had worked for. As she walked out of the hospital, the weight of her decision pressed heavily upon her chest. The night air felt colder now, devoid of the adrenaline that had fueled her earlier. Days later, the news of her dismissal reached Michael Anderson, an inspector from the Ministry of Health. He had been investigating the conditions of the city's homeless population when he learned that a nurse had been fired for treating a homeless man, John Mitchell, who was also his estranged father. The revelation shook him to the core, igniting a fire within him to uncover the truth behind the incident. Michael marched into the hospital, determined to find out more about Emma and her actions. As he approached the reception desk, he demanded to speak with someone who could provide insight into the situation. His authoritative presence immediately garnered attention. "I need to know what happened with Dr. Emma Thompson and John Mitchell," he stated, his voice firm. The receptionist, taken aback by his intensity, quickly directed him to Dr. Edwards' office. Michael knocked on the door, entering without waiting for an invitation. "Dr. Edwards, we need to talk," he declared. The doctor looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "This isn't a good time, Anderson. I'm busy." "I don't care," Michael shot back. "I need to know why you fired a dedicated surgeon for trying to save a life. It's unacceptable." Dr. Edwards straightened, his demeanor shifting from surprise to defensiveness. "That was a violation of hospital policy. Rules are in place for a reason. Rules that protect your reputation at the cost of human lives?" Michael challenged, his voice rising. "You had a chance to support a compassionate act, and instead, you chose to uphold a corrupt system." The tension in the room was palpable as Michael's words hung in the air. He knew he had to fight for Emma, for John, and for the countless others who had suffered under this rigid administration. The truth was unraveling, and he was determined to expose the corruption that lay beneath the surface. Emma's kindness would not be forgotten, and neither would the injustice she faced. In the dimly lit corridors of St. Augustine's Hospital, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the sound of hurried footsteps. Emma Thompson, a dedicated young surgeon in her late 20s, had just completed another grueling shift. The fatigue weighed heavily on her, but the flickering light of purpose still burned bright in her eyes. Her dream of saving lives was what propelled her through the long hours, despite the disapproval she faced from her mother, Margaret. The tension between them was a constant ache in Emma's heart, but she had long since learned to prioritize her mission over familial expectations. That night, as she left the hospital, the world outside was cloaked in darkness. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, wishing for a moment that she could shed the burdens of her day-to-day life. Just as she was about to cross the street, something caught her eye. A figure slumped against the cold stone wall of the hospital. Curiosity and concern tugged at her, and she instinctively approached. There, half hidden in shadows, was John Mitchell, a homeless man with deep gashes on his arms and a pallid face that spoke of suffering. "Hey, are you all right?" Emma asked gently, kneeling beside him. John looked up, his eyes clouded with pain and confusion. I don't know. Just hurts, lady," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Emma felt her heart race. She knew the rules of the hospital. She wasn't supposed to treat anyone outside of her scheduled patients, especially not someone like John. But the sight of him, vulnerable and hurting, ignited a fierce determination within her. "I need to help you," she said, her voice firm. "Can you stand?" With great effort, John nodded, and Emma wrapped an arm around his waist, helping him to his feet. "Let's get you inside," she urged, her mind racing with the possible repercussions of her actions. But she pushed those thoughts aside. She couldn't walk away from someone in need. As they entered the hospital, Emma guided John through the emergency doors, her heart pounding. She glanced around, hoping no one would notice her breach of protocol. "Just a quick checkup, all right?" she whispered to John, who nodded weakly. However, Emma's actions did not go unnoticed. Dr. Robert Edwards, the stern chief surgeon, was making his rounds when he spotted Emma. "What are you doing, Dr. Thompson?" he barked, his voice echoing through the corridor. Emma straightened up, adrenaline surging through her. "He needs help, Dr. Edwards. He's hurt and—" "Those are not your patients," he interrupted, his tone harsh and unforgiving. "You're risking your career for a homeless man? What were you thinking?" Emma felt the weight of his words crash over her, but she held her ground. "I was thinking that he deserves care, just like anyone else. We can't ignore someone in pain just because of their circumstances." Dr. Edwards's expression hardened. "You're being naive. This is a hospital, not a charity. We have rules for a reason." He took a step closer, his gaze piercing. "I'm warning you, if you continue this way, I will have no choice but to take disciplinary action." Emma's heart sank. She was aware of the risks she was taking, yet the thought of abandoning John was unbearable. "I can't just stand by and do nothing," she replied, her voice trembling but resolute. "Very well then. You've made your choice." Dr. Edwards's lips twisted into a grim line as he turned away, leaving Emma to grapple with the fallout of her decision. Hours later, after treating John and ensuring he was stable, Emma sat in her office, her hands trembling as she awaited the inevitable. The door swung open, and Dr. Edwards strode in, a shadow of authority hanging over him. "Emma, I'm afraid I have no choice," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "You're suspended. Effective immediately." The words struck Emma like a physical blow. "You can't be serious," she gasped, feeling the walls of her world begin to crumble. "I was trying to help." "Help?" he scoffed. "You've jeopardized the integrity of this institution. You think your compassion absolves you of the consequences? You're done here." As he left, Emma felt a storm of emotion swirl within her. Anger, disbelief, and a profound sense of loss. She stared blankly at the walls of her office, her dreams seeming to slip through her fingers like grains of sand. The news of her suspension spread quickly through the hospital, and soon, whispers followed her like shadows. Emma's heart sank further, but she clung to the belief that she had done the right thing. She had helped John Mitchell when no one else would. Yet, the isolation was suffocating, and every familiar face now felt distant. Days later, as she sat at home, contemplating her future, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her friend and colleague, Sarah. "Did you hear? There's been a major development with John Mitchell. You need to see this." Intrigued, Emma switched on the television. The news anchor's voice was urgent. In a shocking turn of events, John Mitchell, the homeless man treated by Dr. Emma Thompson, has been identified as the estranged father of Michael Anderson, an inspector at the Ministry of Health. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Michael Anderson? She remembered him from a few hospital meetings, a serious man with an air of authority. The report continued, detailing how Michael had been searching for his father for years, unaware of the man's condition or whereabouts. As the story unfolded, Emma felt a rush of emotions. Sympathy for John, uncertainty about her own future, and a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could change everything. She picked up her phone and texted Sarah, her fingers moving swiftly over the screen. "What's happening now? Is John okay?" The response was almost immediate. "I don't know, but Michael is furious about what happened to his dad. He's coming to the hospital to talk to the board. I'll keep you posted." Emma's heart raced. This could turn into something monumental, not just for her but for John as well. She thought about the warmth in John's grateful smile when she had treated him, the way he had looked at her as if she were his only lifeline in that moment of despair. Later that day, she received another message from Sarah. "Michael wants to meet with you. He's demanding answers about what happened with his father." The request sent ripples of anxiety through Emma. Meeting Michael would mean confronting her actions and the consequences of her compassion. Yet, deep down, she knew she had to face him. If she could help John, maybe she could also help Michael understand her intentions. When they finally met in a small conference room of the hospital, Emma felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Michael entered, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "Dr. Thompson," he began, his voice steady but edged with emotion. "Thank you for treating my father." Emma nodded, feeling the sincerity in his words. "I just did what I felt was right. He needed help." "I understand that," Michael replied, his expression softening. "But do you realize the risks you took? My father could have been turned away, left to suffer without care." "I couldn't just let that happen," Emma said, her voice rising slightly. Every life deserves compassion, regardless of their circumstances. Michael studied her for a moment and then sighed. I get that now, but there's more at stake here than just a single act of kindness. Dr. Edwards has been running a corrupt operation in this hospital, and your actions might have exposed him. Emma's heart raced at the implication. What do you mean? Michael leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. I have evidence that he's been misallocating funds and prioritizing profits over patient care. Your case could be the catalyst we need to bring him down. As they talked, a sense of purpose began to well up inside Emma. Perhaps her decision to help John wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. Perhaps it was the spark that could ignite real change in the hospital. Let's work together, Emma suggested, her determination solidifying. If we can use this to expose the truth, we might be able to save not just my career but also the lives of many others. Michael nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I think we can make this work. Together. In that moment, amid the swirling chaos of their circumstances, two souls forged a connection. One born of adversity, compassion, and a shared desire to seek justice. Emma realized that, while the road ahead might be fraught with challenges, she now had a partner who understood her mission. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of hope blossoming within her heart. Emma Thompson, a young and dedicated surgeon, stood in the dimly lit corridor of the hospital, her heart pounding with a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The sterile scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, reminding her of the countless lives she had touched and the many more she aspired to save. Her dream of becoming a surgeon had always been a source of pride, but it was also a point of contention between her and her mother, Margaret. Margaret, a woman of traditional values, had never understood Emma's passion for medicine. Why not pursue something safer, something more respectable? She would often ask, her voice laced with concern. Emma, however, was resolute and driven by a profound sense of purpose. That particular night, after a grueling 12-hour shift, Emma found herself wandering the hospital's entrance, her mind still racing with the day's events. Suddenly, her gaze fell upon a figure crumpled on the ground. John Mitchell, a homeless man she had seen occasionally near the hospital. His face was pale, and his clothes were tattered, but what caught her attention was the deep gash on his forehead, blood trickling down into his matted hair. A wave of compassion surged through her. Help! Someone, please! Emma shouted, rushing to his side. She knelt beside John, her medical instincts kicking in despite the late hour. Stay with me, John. We're going to get you help. Can you hear me? John's eyes fluttered open, and he managed a faint nod, his voice barely a whisper. I can't feel my leg. Emma's heart sank as she assessed the situation. She knew that the hospital's policies regarding treating non-admitted patients were strict, especially for those without insurance or a permanent address. Yet, the thought of leaving John in such a dire state was unbearable. She looked around, ensuring no one was watching, and made her decision. I'll take you inside, she said firmly, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Just hold on. With great effort, Emma helped John to his feet, supporting him as they made their way through the hospital's entrance. Her heart raced, knowing she was about to defy the rules she had sworn to uphold. As they entered the emergency room, she called out to her colleague, Dr. Lisa Chin. Lisa, I need your help. Emma shouted, urgency lacing her tone. Dr. Chun looked up from her station, concern etched on her face. What happened? He's hurt badly. We need to get him stabilized before we can do anything else, Emma explained, gesturing to John, who was now leaning heavily against the wall, his eyes clouded with pain. Emma and Lisa sprang into action, working quickly to assess John's injuries while keeping an eye on the door, fearful that someone would discover their improvised treatment. As they worked, the tension in the room was palpable. Emma felt a knot tightening in her stomach, aware of the consequences that could follow if Dr. Robert Edwards, her superior, found out what she was doing. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Dr. Edwards entered the room, his expression stern. What's going on here? Emma's heart raced as she exchanged a glance with Lisa. Dr. Edwards, this man needs immediate care. I don't care what he needs. Edwards interrupted, his voice sharp. You know the rules, Emma. We can't treat someone who isn't admitted. This is a liability. But he's in distress. We can't just let him suffer, Emma argued, her voice rising. We took an oath to help those in need. Edward's eyes narrowed, and the air in the room grew thick with tension. You're risking your career for a homeless man? You need to think about the consequences of your actions. Despite the fear gnawing at her insides, Emma stood her ground. I refuse to turn my back on someone who needs help. I can't just walk away. Do you really think you can save everyone? Edward shot back, his tone condescending. You're playing God, and that's not your role here. Emma felt a surge of anger and frustration. It's not about playing God. It's about being human. In an unexpected turn of events, Edward's expression hardened. This is insubordination, Emma. If you continue with this, I'll have no choice but to terminate your position. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Emma felt her heart drop, but she remained resolute. I won't regret my decision. I'd rather be fired than stand by and do nothing. Edward's jaw clenched as he processed her words. Very well. Consider this your final act here. You're fired. Emma's stomach twisted at the finality of his statement. But as she glanced at John, who was now being treated by Lisa, she felt a sense of clarity. She had chosen compassion over compliance, and that was a decision she could live with. As she gathered her belongings later that night, Emma's mind raced with thoughts of uncertainty. What would she do now? How would she explain this to her mother? In that moment of despair, her phone buzzed. It was Michael Anderson, an inspector from the Ministry of Health. They had met briefly during a previous investigation, and he had always been respectful of her work. Emma, I heard what happened. Are you okay? Michael's voice was steady, but she could sense the concern behind it.
I'm all right.
Just a little overwhelmed, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. I know this is a tough situation, but I want to help you. I've just discovered something that might change everything, he said, his tone shifting to one of urgency. That man you treated, John Mitchell, he's my father. Emma's heart skipped a beat. What? I had no idea. I just wanted to help him. I know, Michael said softly, and you did more than you realize. I need to understand what happened. Can we meet? As they arranged to meet, Emma felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this unexpected turn of events could lead to justice, not only for John, but also for herself. The thought of being vindicated, of having her actions recognized, filled her with determination. She had stood up for what was right, and now it seemed as though the universe was aligning to support her cause. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she reflected on the choices she had made. She knew she had risked everything, but she also understood that true compassion often came at a cost. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She would continue to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, no matter the obstacles in her path. Emma Thompson had always been captivated by the intricacies of the human body. From a young age, she had imagined herself in the operating room, wielding a scalpel, stitching lives back together. Her passion for medicine burned bright, even in the face of her mother's skepticism. Margaret Thompson, a woman of traditional values, had always envisioned a different path for her daughter, one that perhaps involved less blood and more stability. Emma, dear, have you thought about teaching? It's far safer, Margaret would often suggest, her voice thick with concern. But for Emma, safety felt like a cage, while the operating room was a sanctuary. One evening, after a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, Emma stepped outside into the cool night air. The city was alive with the sounds of traffic and distant laughter, but her heart felt heavy. She had just lost a patient, a young man whose life had slipped away despite her best efforts. As she walked toward her car, she spotted a figure huddled next to the entrance, shivering in the cold. It was John Mitchell, a homeless man whose life had been marred by hardship. His face was bruised, and blood trickled from a gash on his forehead. Emma's heart raced. She knew the hospital had strict policies regarding treating individuals without insurance, especially those who didn't belong to their world. But as she looked into John's eyes, she saw desperation and pain that transcended the bureaucratic rules. "Hey, can you hear me?" she asked gently, kneeling beside him. "Yeah, I just need some help," John stammered, his voice hoarse. I didn't mean to get in trouble. I fell. Emma's mind raced. If she brought him into the hospital, she would be breaking protocol, but the thought of leaving him there, suffering, was unbearable. "You're going to be okay," she promised, her voice steady. "I'm going to help you." With that, she made the decision that would change everything. Emma led John through a side entrance, her heart pounding as she guided him to a small examination room she could use in secret. She quickly assessed his injuries, her hands moving with practiced ease. As she worked, she felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. "You're lucky I'm not on duty anymore," she joked lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Otherwise, I'd be in a whole heap of trouble." John managed a weak smile. "You're a good person. You know that?" "Let's just say I'm a stubborn one," Emma replied, bandaging his forehead. But her moment of compassion would not go unchallenged. Her boss, Dr. Robert Edwards, was known for his strict adherence to hospital regulations. It didn't take long for the alarm to be raised. As Emma finished treating John, she heard the door swing open, and there stood Dr. Edwards, his expression thunderous. "What do you think you're doing, Emma?" he barked, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "This is unacceptable." Emma straightened, her heart racing as she faced him. "He needed help, Dr. Edwards. I couldn't just leave him there to die. Rules are in place for a reason. You could lose your license over this," he snapped, stepping closer. His eyes bored into hers, filled with a mix of fury and disbelief. "I was only trying to save a life," Emma countered, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her. "Isn't that what we're here for? Not at the cost of your career. You need to understand where your priorities lie," he replied, crossing his arms. Emma felt her resolve begin to waver. The weight of her actions bore down on her. What's the point of this job if we don't care for those who are most vulnerable? The confrontation escalated, with Dr. Edwards condemning her actions and Emma standing her ground. Eventually, the inevitable happened. "You're suspended, Emma." Effective immediately, he declared, the finality of his words cutting through her like a knife. Emma's heart sank. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am," he replied coldly. "You need to understand that compassion cannot override professional responsibility." As he stormed out, Emma felt a mix of anger and despair wash over her. She had acted out of compassion, but now, her career hung in the balance. In the days that followed, Emma faced the harsh reality of her decision. She spent hours replaying the events in her mind, questioning if she had done the right thing. She was devastated by the loss of her job, a position she had fought so hard to attain. "Maybe I should have just followed the rules," she murmured to herself, staring into the mirror, her reflection a mixture of determination and doubt. Meanwhile, Michael Anderson, an inspector from the Ministry of Health, was conducting an investigation into the hospital's practices. He had always been a man of integrity, committed to uncovering the truth. When he received the report about a homeless man being treated after hours, he felt a twinge of curiosity. But when he learned that the patient was John Mitchell, a man he had been searching for, his heart raced. "John? My father?" Michael whispered in disbelief as he stared at the file. His father had been missing for years, lost to the streets and the shadows of addiction. The realization hit him hard. This could be the breakthrough he had been waiting for. Without hesitation, Michael rushed to the hospital, his mind racing with thoughts of what he might find. He was determined to reach John before it was too late. He pushed through the hospital doors, scanning the waiting area until he spotted Emma, her face pale and drawn. "Emma," he called, hurrying toward her. "Is it true? Is John here?" She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Michael? Yes, he's here. I treated him, but what?" he pressed, his heart pounding. "Dr. Edwards suspended me for it," Emma admitted, her voice breaking. "I couldn't just let him suffer." Michael felt a surge of gratitude mixed with anger. "You did the right thing, Emma. You saved his life," he said vehemently. "We need to find a way to help both you and John." Emma's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I just wish it hadn't cost me my job." As they spoke, a bond began to form between them, forged in shared purpose and understanding. Michael's determination to uncover the truth behind John's disappearance and Emma's unwavering compassion for the vulnerable made them allies in a fight for justice. Their paths had crossed in a tumultuous storm, but together, they could weather the aftermath. "Let's get John out of here," Michael said decisively. "We'll figure this out together." Emma nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. Perhaps, in this chaos, they could find a way to right the wrongs and bring light to the shadows that had engulfed their lives. Together, they could challenge the system that had failed so many, and perhaps, in the process, discover something profound about themselves. Emma Thompson stood in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of St. Mary's Hospital, her heart heavy with the weight of her choices. She had always envisioned a life dedicated to saving others, a noble pursuit that had become her identity. Yet, despite her unwavering commitment, her mother, Margaret, had always cast a shadow of doubt over her aspirations. "You need to think about your future, Emma," Margaret would often say, her voice laced with anxiety. "This is not a life for a woman. It's too dangerous, too unpredictable." Emma clenched her jaw at the memory, the familiar sting of her mother's disapproval still fresh. She had fought against that narrative her whole life, determined to carve her own path in the world of medicine. But it was a constant battle, one that left her feeling isolated despite the camaraderie of her colleagues. As the clock ticked towards midnight after a grueling shift, she found herself wandering the hospital's entrance, her mind racing with thoughts of her mother and the challenges of the day. It was then that she spotted him, a man huddled in the shadows, his face bruised and battered, a stark contrast to the gleaming facade of the hospital. John Mitchell, a name that would soon become more than just a faceless victim in her mind. Emma felt an immediate tug at her heartstrings. He was a homeless man, the kind of person society often overlooked, and he was in desperate need of help. "Hey," Emma called softly, kneeling beside him, her medical instincts kicking in. "Can you hear me? I'm a doctor. I can help you." John blinked, his eyes filled with pain and confusion. "Why would you want to help me?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because everyone deserves a chance," she replied, her compassion pouring out in her words. "Please, let me take a look at you." Despite the risks, Emma felt it was her duty to act. She knew the hospital's policies forbade treating individuals who weren't registered patients, especially outside the confines of the emergency room. But as she examined John, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the right thing to do. His injuries were severe. He needed immediate care, and she was willing to put everything on the line for him. However, her noble intentions were soon met with harsh reality. Dr. Robert Edwards, the hospital's chief surgeon and a man known for his rigid adherence to protocol, stormed into the scene moments later. The look on his face was a mixture of disbelief and anger. "What in the world do you think you're doing, Thompson?" he barked, crossing his arms over his chest. "You can't just treat anyone who wanders in off the street. This isn't a charity." Emma stood her ground, her heart racing. "He's injured, Dr. Edwards. He needs care, and I can help him." "You're jeopardizing your career for a lost cause," he shot back, his voice low and threatening. "This is a hospital, not a shelter. You know the rules." Emma met his gaze with fierce determination. "And what about the Hippocratic Oath? What about saving lives? Isn't that what we're here for?" "Not when it involves breaking the law," he countered, his tone icy. "I could report you for this." "Go ahead," she said defiantly, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'll take the consequences, but I won't stand by and let someone suffer when I have the power to help." The confrontation escalated quickly. Dr. Edwards, unyielding in his position of authority, threatened her with immediate suspension. Emma's heart sank. She had dedicated herself to this hospital, to her patients, and now, because of one act of compassion, it all hung in the balance. "You're making a huge mistake, Emma," he warned, his voice cold. "You'll regret this." "I'd rather regret helping someone than regret doing nothing at all," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. With that, the ultimatum was delivered. Dr. Edwards dismissed her, and Emma felt the world around her crumble. She had lost her position, the very thing that defined her. As she stepped away from the hospital, Her heart felt heavy with sorrow and uncertainty. She had acted out of compassion, yet the repercussions were devastating. Days passed, and Emma struggled to find her footing. The shame of her dismissal weighed on her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had done the right thing. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to her, Michael Anderson, an inspector from the Ministry of Health, was unraveling a web of connections that would change everything. He had been investigating the circumstances surrounding John Mitchell, the man Emma had tried to save. When Michael discovered that John was, in fact, his long-lost father, the revelation sent shockwaves through him. His father had vanished years ago, swallowed by the streets, and now, here he was, lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. "Dad," Michael whispered, his voice trembling as he approached the unconscious figure. "Is it really you?" As he delved deeper, Michael uncovered the truth about John's life, his struggles, his pain, and the mistakes that had led him to this point. But what truly infuriated him was the injustice Emma had faced for her act of kindness. He felt a surge of determination. He needed to make things right. After a thorough investigation, Michael confronted Dr. Edwards, demanding accountability for his actions. "You can't silence compassion, Edwards," he argued, his voice firm. "Emma Thompson acted out of integrity, and you punished her for it. This isn't just about hospital policy. It's about humanity." Dr. Edwards scoffed, but Michael had gathered enough evidence to ensure that the truth would come to light. "You're corrupt, and it's time the world knows," he continued, his resolve unwavering. The news spread like wildfire, and soon the hospital board had no choice but to act. Emma was reinstated, her name cleared, and her compassion recognized as a beacon of hope in a system that had grown cold and bureaucratic. As she walked back into the hospital, the familiar sounds of beeping machines and murmurs of patients surrounded her. But this time, it felt different. Emma had not only fought for her career, but had also sparked a movement for change. "Emma!" Michael's voice broke through her thoughts as he approached her, his expression a mix of admiration and relief. "I'm so glad you're back." "Thank you, Michael. I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her heart swelling with gratitude. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, a connection sparked between them, forged by their shared experiences and the battles they had fought. "We need to keep fighting," he said gently, a newfound passion lighting his eyes. "For people like your father, and for those who don't have a voice." Emma nodded, her heart racing at the prospect of a future filled with purpose. "Together," she affirmed, a smile breaking across her face. As they stood side by side, united in their mission, Emma realized that not only had she found her place in the world, but she had also discovered a partner who shared her vision.
If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel now. Click the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Leave a like if you liked it,